And I am live. Hi, everybody. Hope you're well. I saw some punctuality criticism slipping into the chat, so I said I'd go live now. But yeah, I hope you're all well. Thanks for joining me. Lots to discuss tonight. I have just realized as well that I might have bad audio. Bear with me. Okay. Grant, sorry. I just had a because you in the chat rushed me. Because I'm late as always, I didn't do my settings right. So I think you should be hearing me and seeing me okay now. I would appreciate just a little sound check. Cool, because I've had some errors in the past with that kind of stuff. So guys, tonight I want to talk about a few things. I mean, there's so much going on in Ireland right now, but the last time I streamed was just before the demo on Monday. I think the night before, so last Sunday. But in just a few days, there's so much happening in Ireland, and I don't know, it's hard to keep up. It's mad. So subjects for tonight, we'll say. I want to the main thing, cut to the chase, right? The main thing I want to talk about is this this kind of crumbling, as the title suggests, crumbling of legitimacy, of the state in Ireland. It's something that, and I'll get into details. It's someone says I have a young fella jacket on. Yeah, it's young fella summer, like, but it's hard to describe. Anyone who's paying attention in Ireland now gets it, but I don't think people even understand the rate at which the words I'm looking for are like social contract, the social contract, public order, the sort of the basic relationship between any state and the governed people. The extent to which that is breaking down in Ireland, the radical rate at which that is breaking down. And you could say, oh, maybe that's just too much Twitter. Maybe you're just paying too much attention to Twitter. Everything is fine. It's kind of not like, I think more and more people are getting it. There's less of a sort of gap between, oh, well, if you're paying attention to goings on Twitter versus if you're just an ordinary person living your life, there's a convergence there where everyone is getting mad. So many people I talk to are speaking about these things and they get it. We'll say normal people or whatever, people who aren't thoroughly engaged in this stuff. But I would have said this a week ago. I would have said it 2-3 weeks ago. I've been saying this for a long time, but it's almost like I feel a bit like Nostradamus, although I'm not. I'm just observing like having common sense and observing reality. And yet, as much as I've been saying it and I've been predicting it, I'm still taken aback at the rate it's keeping apace. It's ahead of schedule in my view. Things are moving so fast. And what's going on anyway in Ireland right now is that you're having these scenarios where allegedly random migrant men are accused of snatching up kids or trying to abduct kids or going up and saying something inappropriate or flashing a kid, something like that, right? And they end up getting panned out on the floor, right, for all of the internet to see. And people take out their cameras and take a video. I mean, look, that's like end of the show there. I'll leave it because that's kind of the crux of it in a way. But I want to talk about the implications of that because that's not normal, let's say, in a society, and it's the kind of thing that it's kind of like when people talk about World War II and World War I or something like that. You look at something historically, and there's this sense that in hindsight that it began on this date and it finished on this date, and here's the era of history that it is, and here's the context, and you square it away as such. And yet, very often, if you actually look back at the history of such events or phenomenons, you'll see that at the time they didn't necessarily know that. Well, we're in World War II now. They didn't sort of. When Germany invaded Poland and Britain declared war on Germany, they didn't kind of say, "Oh, okay, World War II has now begun." All sorts of other things had to happen, and also before that time, not to diverge to World War II, but a few years before 1939, there was, as far as I remember, Japan had invaded China. There was goings on with China and Japan years before. So did it start then? What's the crack? It's vague at the time, and nobody knows any big starting gun has happened on an event, and yet historically we understand it as an event. And I think right now Ireland is in the middle of some mad stuff that we're following it day to day, but we don't fully appreciate the magnitude of what's actually going on. And if you look at something like alleged, I say alleged, look, these are all caveats and whatever, but there's these alleged assaults, or like in some cases full on sexual assaults and molestation of children, let's say, or it could be stealing, it could be some other crime, but mainly it's with kids. Or it could be that someone spoke inappropriately to a kid or whatever, one of these random migrants walking around. And like I say, they end up getting, as we say in Ireland, panned out on the ground. Anybody who's not Irish won't get that, but they end up getting laid out on the floor, knocked out, whatever. And usually it's on video. And like I just mentioned a while ago, that's not actually normal. I'm not so many. I'm a live streamer. I'm on camera here. I have to speak a certain way, but you know, it's not that I'm passing judgment on these things or taking let's say, a I have to be careful on the positions on these things. You don't want to be taken out of context, but it's not that I'm saying it's wrong for someone who child gets abducted to defend themselves and their child, right? But what I am saying is that it's not normal. As in, if you imagine in your mind, not a utopian society, but a functioning, healthy society. Like I was in a chat group today. This is my internet life, right? But someone mentioned they had been abroad. Actually, a couple of people mentioned they had been abroad to various places and that how normal it was and how nice it was, Not a utopia, but just normal. And there's this thing in Ireland and maybe some other Western countries that if you go to other places, you realize you get an impression of how bad things are. I'm already rambling my ass off here. I suppose the intro is done now. So you can super chat. You can follow the link below in the description. I'd have to do this every day, and you can follow my social media and support the channel. Help me keep the streams going, incentivize me to do more, etc. So the ramble is well on its way. So people who've been abroad, and I am connecting back on the dots here. Don't worry, I'm following a thought process here. But people who go abroad to other places, and here's the other thing is that you don't even have to go to Japan or South Korea. That's why people usually imagine some far off place. But even within the West, everyone in the West thinks the West is declining, and it is everywhere. But I think Ireland, a lot of countries are bad, but like Ireland, England, France, Germany to an extent, probably Canada in different ways. But I think Ireland is really bad. The glum atmosphere around the country, the out of control feeling, like in my title, that Ireland's going feral and the state is losing its legitimacy and the rate is obscene. And because Ireland's starting population is small, in the Republic, 5 million. So you can bring a few million migrants into England and that's terrible. And the rate is terrible in England too, let's say. But they do have this bigger sponge to kind of absorb it, bigger land area as well, I suppose. Ireland is a smaller land area and just 5 million people. The amount of migrants who get sucked into like New York and LA or something, and maybe Chicago combined, if you apply that to Ireland, you're just wiping out the country full stop. So the rate is, and it's just the governance in Ireland, the tone, the flavor in Ireland across the board. Even something like the fuel, I forget this statistic, this is just off the top of my head, but the cost of fuel and energy in Ireland is something like twice, or it's something much higher than the European average. So across the board, Ireland is just bad. And again, the immigration thing is maybe worse proportionally, and we also we're more suppressed. We don't have even a Tories. We don't even have, as bad as they're, Republicans or whatever. It's such a tinderbox of a situation. And here we are. But my point about people going abroad is that when people do go abroad, they come back and they realize it. I only wish that I could somehow fund every Irish person to go to Malta and to Australia and to Japan and to Iran and to St. Petersburg and etc. Other places, even perhaps even Buenos Aires or something. There's lots of places and if people could just go to these places, stay there for a week and come back, they would have that. It's like that thing, if you're in a smoky room, something's burning, you might not notice over time, and then you leave and come back and you notice how smoky the room is. I think people would have that if they got more of a chance to leave, because it is really bad. So anyway, my point being, a normal society, not a utopia, but just a society where it's functioning reasonably well, and you get there and you think, this is reasonably pleasant, a normal society. It's got pros and cons, but it's functioning kind of normally. To be honest, there's even African countries where you could be in the capital city and think, you know what, at this point, if I'm in Addis Ababa or Lusaka or wherever, Kampala or something, there are probably parts, I suppose, of those cities where you would think, you know what, it's got its problems, but there's at least there's a functioning, ordinary society here, and Ireland is really strange. And again, it's there. You might go to a nice bar. There are nice spots in Ireland, but they're becoming increasingly rare. So, for example, if you were to go to Hoth, let's say, to get a break somewhere nice like that, a rich area, and get a dinner and hang out and stuff like that, even that now has become less accessible to most people. Most people don't have money for restaurants and to go to the nice areas anymore. So it's everything is contracting into this nasty, what's the word? Sort of feverish, swampy environment. It's really bad. And anyway, to the crux of what I'm talking about here is these reprisals. Given the context I've just told you, this bad atmosphere in Ireland and the out of control immigration and everything else, and the political circus that's going on, you have now a situation where there are these random migrants, allegedly, and in many cases, I suppose, actually and definitely, snatching up kids or doing something with kids and getting knocked out. And then it goes around online. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm the guy who comes on here every night and talks about how I'm against immigration, mass immigration, fake UGs, all of that. But just to look at things from a bird's eye view, let's say you're not an anti-immigration activist per se, but you just want a normal society. You would look at that and think this is an ugly scenario, both ways. It's ugly in the fact that you're bringing in, I think it's something like 86 people a day or something like that. And that's just the ones that are registered. Let's be honest, they register with IPASS. How many don't register with IPASS? How many are in some sort of human trafficking thing that, I don't know, they either go onto the boats in the West, fishing slaves, or they're in a mushroom factory, or all this kind of stuff, or they're in a human trafficking scam themselves, involved in it, drug trafficking and all of this. There are lots of people who register what I pass. These are the 90 people every day. But then there's others. So look, how many is it? What is it really? Is it 200? God knows. But hundreds, we'll say, or 100 or hundreds of people coming into the country every day. A house that is completely overloaded, stretched to capacity. The electricity and water grids are failing, especially in Dublin. And they're crying out about that. They're putting children, largely migrant children, by the way, into this just came out tonight, TUSLA, the Child Protection Service. They're contracting out all of these things to random unregulated groups. So God knows what is going on. And so whether it's child care, like care of vulnerable lost children or whatever it is, or whether it's electricity or water, everything is falling apart. There is this, and maybe I'm a doomsayer or whatever, but I think it's true. Falling apart is a relative term, but just I think in a general sense, it's falling apart compared to what anyone would consider normal. And meanwhile, you have the state is just kind of there. Well, I'll get to that. It's kind of my conclusion on this, but on top of something like water, and I was talking to someone about this earlier, on top of water and electricity, which in one sense are quantifiable, it's easy for an analyst and sewage, all the sewage going out in Ringsend in Dublin. There's like 3 times more than Dublin can, or I'm making that up to be honest, but a lot more than Dublin. It's way over capacity. It was built, all of this infrastructure, they say was built in like the 40s, and that would have already needed an overhaul anyway, with just a normal population. And even at that, they had planned for a certain, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but they had planned for a certain number, and it's way over. In Dublin, it's whatever, it's like twice as much, 500,000 more, whatever it is. It's not just slightly over what was planned for, it's way over. So they're dealing with somewhere there's a diligent sewerage expert who's down there just trying to fight a battle, and same with water, within these bureaucracies that are just eating themselves and just there for profit anyway, because that's the nature of the country now. But then they don't have a state. They don't have a statesman, a Lee Kuan Yew, someone Ataturk, whatever, someone like that, or a governing elite who are taking a sincere interest in this thing. Let's be real. People like Simon Harris, Helen McEntee, they're all interchangeable. But what my theory is that they are effectively a comprador elite. I can find the definition of comprador if it's any use. It's just a word I've become very fond of. I'll find it here. Comprador. Just so you know, I'm sure many of you already know, but I've often said that we don't have the language to describe what this is. It an oligarchy? Is it a kleptocracy? What is it? A tyranny? An anarcho tyranny? What is it? But one of we never will have the language, I think, for a long time to describe this. We'll have to literally invent new words. But an existing word that is good is comprador, a person who acts as an agent for foreign organizations engaged in investment, trade, or economic or political exploitation. I mean, it's as close as any existing word gets to it, in my view. And because we have such a comprador elite, ruling class, the politicians, the actors who come out and speak about it, and a lot of the others, institutional leaders and all of that, because we have that, you could have a comprador elite who are, let's say, 50% comprador. They're half bought out and they're kind of statespeople, genuinely. But what we have right now, I think, is a full rot, as opposed to, let's say you have some wood in a roof or something that's a little bit rotten. We have one now that is just, it's all holes. The wood, let's say it's woodworm, it's just eaten raw, eaten through. So that and this happened over the course of, I suppose, decades on a scale. But we've gotten to the point now where I believe that our government and our deep state, or whatever, the whole thing, including the politicians you see on TV, are so beholden to the IDA, multinationals, Google, the US foreign or State Department, all of that, all of these various interests. They're so beholden to them that there's no government left. There's no Simon Harris, and all of these different people and all of the deep state are so sort of entrenched in that they don't even bother sitting down and really thinking about what are we actually going to do about water? What are we actually going to do about migration? If they were thinking about any of this, if there was any semblance of that, we wouldn't be in this housing crisis. We wouldn't be in this migration crisis, if you want to call it that. They wouldn't be slapping on carbon tax after carbon tax when people are cold in their homes and can't put fuel in their cars anymore. They wouldn't, even just the worst excesses they would refrain from, even if they were half comprador. They would at least refrain from that. But they're not. There's nothing good happening. Everyone in Ireland knows this. There's no sense that anything is going to get better. Nobody thinks, well, just, I always mention Lee Kuan Yew, but let's say you're a Singaporean in 1982. There are certain things you don't like, but there's a general sense that things are getting better, and there is someone working on making things better. You come out one day and you think that footpath's a bit better than it was, actually, in fairness. It's actually nicer than the old one. And I actually do have a lot more spare cash than I did 3 years ago, or whatever it is. There's no sense of that. There's no sense that things will even remain the same, just as bad as they are. There's only a sense of complete plunder. Even people who don't think about these things and talk and elaborate about these things often, they have it. It's in them. They sense the complete, absolute plunder that is occurring at the current time. And I think that is a case where a state, basically, like train cars, just, it's completely decoupled from that, and they serve the people that they serve in the interest that, and whether it's banks, international finance capital, various things like that. That's it. So we're basically without a government. And to speak to that a little bit, some people say there's no one at the wheel. Like, there's no one controlling this. I used to have this view as well, is that this society is kind of being ran by just some sort of corruption inertia. And that's kind of true, but it's a little bit more nuanced, in the sense that it is being ran. So this is kind of the anarcho-tyranny point. It is being ran, and it does have power. It's like, as my video tonight is suggesting, it's lacking thoroughly and in legitimacy, crumbling, as my title suggests. It is crumbling in legitimacy, but they do have power. So, for example, they can go up and pepper spray women in Newtown, Mount Kennedy. The public order unit can pop up like whack-a-mole all over the country when needed, and do their thing. So there is a state acting, and that's the distinction. Is that it's not that there's no one at the wheel. There is someone at the wheel in terms of power and oppression of the underlings, the people in the country. But then, in another sense, there's no one at the wheel. So they're there for power. They're there for oppression. But when it comes to who's going to govern, what's going to happen with water, what's going to happen with our lives, our quality of life, our standard of living, what's going to happen with, and this is, I'll get back to it, the primary thing, what's going to happen with our safety and our ability, I'll get to it. But all these primal fundamental things. I think the government just isn't there. You knock on the door and there's just no one home for those things, but they are there when they need to be for their own interests. They're there, for example, if someone challenges the interests of the interests who profit from this slave colony, effectively, this debt slavery colony. They're there for them. So there is a government at play in the country, and it's actually quite effective, but it governs for them. That is their demos. When you talk about a democracy, I don't know, the Latin breakdown of that word is broken down into two parts. It's kind of like the idea of power and people, or whatever, something like that. So it's like there is a government there and it rules effectively, but it is not ruling or administering for the people who happen to live on this landmass, Irish people primarily. So that's a very weird situation. So what you end up with are these crumbling things, crumbling electricity grids, water infrastructure, bringing hundreds of people in every day to a country that's already screwed, basically, etc., etc. Things that to any common sense person make no sense. Why is this happening? But and here's my sort of the lead to what I'm talking about here, is that electricity and water are quantifiable. Someone could analyze it and say, here's the shortfall. It's shocking. It's terrible. But here's what it is, etc. It's this many liters or megaliters or whatever. Something that's less quantifiable and more, I shouldn't be lost for words. My job is not to be lost for words, but it's more, it's not arcane, whatever, right? It's just less quantifiable, I'll say, but it's also much, in a way, actually, and what could be more important than electricity and water, but in a way it's almost more important, is this basic social contract between the state. Not a social contract that, where's my really nice playground for my kids, where's my better road than I had last year or whatever. That's a form of social contract. But then you go a level deeper and a level deeper, and you get to the crux of what is the legitimizing factor of any state that rules a territory, a people, or a jurisdiction, whatever. It's this thing you hear a lot, of the monopoly of violence. And that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight because of events in the last few days. That's at the core of it. The state effectively exists to, I think, at the heart of it. And I've been thinking about this so much because of what's been going on. I'm not a political philosopher or anything, but I'm just looking at events staring me in the face and thinking about them when I come to these conclusions. Is that, for example, someone hurts you, someone harms your child, someone breaks your windows, whatever it is, right? That you, the natural state in an animal world or a pre-civilizational, pre-state situation, is that you either, I don't know, you run away and hide, or more likely you seek revenge, you gather a mob together, you go out and you smack the person, you go break their windows, whatever it is. And in the case of something like someone's child is killed, you know, and for YouTube terms of service, I'm just speaking about theoretical concepts here. You drive something through their something, right? And that's generally historically how these things work. This kind of blood vengeance, you know. And of course that leads to tit for tat with their clan, their family, the rest of it. And so the idea in a civilized society is that, well, that's not really tolerable. We can't have that. That just leads to a breakdown in society, and it's obviously unhealthy. And yet most people would agree that, well, if someone kills your child, it's a funny thing. And when you start thinking about it, is that, say, for example, this is a good analogy for it. Not analogy, but case study. So, you know, when you hear of these stories where someone's child is killed and they're either in a courtroom or somewhere else, and they pull a gun out of their pocket and they shoot or they stab the perpetrator, the parent of the child. Most people see that and they think, I'm delighted. I love to see that. That's great. That man got his revenge, and it's a good thing to see. And there's a sense we have as well, a primal sense that we have of, like, wouldn't it be great if the state, the authorities, could just go to that guy and say, listen, the guy was basically proven beyond reasonable doubt that he had done it. But let's say he had already been sentenced or found guilty. So we know he did it. more or less. Then the father of that child killed the perpetrator. You kind of think, and it's a thing a child would say because it's so obviously intuitive to us, is that why can't the state just go to that dad and say, you're good, go home, you didn't, like, we don't strictly allow it, but we're going to just kind of forget about it, you got what was due to you. And yet the state, any state generally, will prosecute, any modern, especially Western state, will prosecute that dad and give him a murder sentence. There might be mitigating, maybe the sentence is mitigated slightly in some way, but I don't even think it would be. But most of us would think that's such a pity in ordinary circumstances. I think most intelligent people who understand the kind of how society should work and think about it, would acknowledge that I don't like that happening to the dad, but I understand that the state has to do that. I'd love if he would walk free, just personally, but I do understand why the state had to persecute him. A child might not be able to get that far, but as an adult, you can think, yeah, that's a pity, it's a regrettable, but that's how it works. And maybe the dad bargained for it. Maybe he did it knowing he would go to jail and accepting that, and the state looks at it and says, we understand why you would do that, but we have to put you also in jail for murder now. And that's sort of, that story is at the heart of a civilized society with a social contract and with a state that has a legitimate and enforceable monopoly of violence. And that's important. What you have in Ireland right now is that, whatever the word is for that, legitimacy of state, monopoly of violence, whatever, combine all these words into let's come up with a German 12-syllable word for that concept. That is falling apart in Ireland right now. That's, as far as I can see it, is that the state's ability to say, I know you want to seek vengeance, I know you want to go feral, as the title suggests, that's the word I'll use, right? I know you want to go feral and sort of go basic mode, where vigilante mode, whatever it is, right? Any of these words. I know you want to do that, and that would be the case in any society when you were wronged, but don't. Basically hold up, like, keep your cool. We're going to deal with it. And we're going to deal with it in a way that, in some sense, yeah, you might want to just take blood vengeance or whatever, but at least what we're doing, in some sense, satisfies the justice nerve we all have. And the way we're administering, so that's the punishment and after something's happened, but also the way we govern the society up until the point where this terrible thing happened, whether it was your child abducted or murdered, or whether it was your windows broken. The state, the way we administered the state before that had happened, was reasonable and fair, and we all more or less, for the most part, had some consensus and agreement on that. And this was just an act of a reprobate, I think that's the word, a reprobate, and someone who acted outside the order that we have established, and that we put measures in to control it as such. So this, we can't account for every human behavior. So just when these things happen, you're satisfied that the state had been acting appropriately in advance of that to try and prevent this wild occurrence from happening. And then following the event, we dealt with it appropriately so that you don't need, basically you will stay within the lines. And what you have now with bringing in all these people, and it's also the lies, is this breaking down of that order, where people just think, and of course I caveat, I condemn all illegal acts and I promote peaceful political change, etc. Right? And yet, just as an analyst, an observer of the situation, people will look at it and say, and the poverty element, the constriction at the moment of people, and the souring of the society is part of this too, in every direction. But people, especially with the migrant thing, people will look at it, and this is true for migrants, it's kind of true in general. Think of Judge Martin Nolan and all of that. People will look at it and think, listen, let's just take a case study. You could use the Cork example, the Ukrainian example, the guy in Ukraine who allegedly molested that child in the bathroom. People will look at it and say, he shouldn't have been here. 80% of the country are against this. We've asked you nicely in every different way. Guys like me live streaming, people protesting, thousands of people on the street in Dublin, the whole lot, right? pitched battles, pepper spray with the guards, the whole. We've kind of tried everything. We know that there is this NGO, Comprador, what's the other word? Janissary elite. All the words are coming out tonight. We know that there's this like embedded structure here to promote lies and to suppress the will of the people. So that's part of it too. One element is bringing in all these migrants, whether Irish or not sentencing criminals accordingly. Bear in mind that the basic premise is that, let's say your child is molested by someone, the basic biological need of a family member of that kid is, and again, I'm speaking conceptually here, so don't mischaracterize, the basic need, the primal need is for blood, right? And so the state giving a harsh jail sentence, which is not very nice, and it's long, and it's whatever, and if the state has death penalty, whatever it is, but the state offers some sort of salve or remedy so that the person is able to park their blood vengeance, and sort of in some fashion just accept the state's authority and legitimacy and power. Fair enough. But so that's one element of it. But then the other element is the lies. So when you start to question this system and say, okay, it doesn't work, it's not good, you're bringing in hundreds of migrants, you're not sentencing anyone, Irish or otherwise, so we have this complete madhouse that puts us all in danger. And then on top of that, you don't feel like you have let's say, a town square and a public office with a politician where you can say, come on out to us, we want to talk to you. And they come out, and everyone in the town could be the top population of Ireland, or it could be an actual town, just the concept of a people, the people who consider themselves the masses, the ruled, the governed, they come out and they seek remedy, and they say, listen, everyone in this town of 3,000 people, or it could be a country of 5 million, whatever, we're all out in this town square, and we're all asking you in almost complete unison, stop this thing. It could be any issue, but we want that. And so the guy comes out in his, nightgown or his night robe, and he says, oh my God, there's such passion, there's such feeling here. They have their pitchforks out, whatever it is. Fine, we'll do what you're saying, or at least I'll sit down with the leaders of this group and say, let's meet in the middle, something like that. People sense that doesn't exist. People sense that, no, there's this complex web of NGOs, and I might get to this in a while, possibly, but even of the internet being able to be turned on and off, where the likes of Dublin, CHQ and all that, or not CHQ, sorry, the tech area, can turn on and off the voice of the people. The NGOs can do whatever they do. They can force trade unionists, all of these different people, to be quiet because of political correctness, the carrot and stick, the firing and the promotion and all of that. And there's this kind of monstrosity there to just suppress us. And so people sense that the reality as it is, and then the machine that is there to oppress us, and that is just completely got a veil up and is just not listening. I talked about this recently, Helen McAtee saying migration is wonderful, it's great for Ireland, because it's, I mean, she's no basis for that, she's no argument for it, it just is. And all of the rest of it. People sense that there's just this wall up between these Comprador elite who are completely rotten through and them. And the more you protest, the more you speak about it, the more you will just be condemned and persecuted. And when you have a situation, all of this coming together, and the economic pressure and everything else, and the societal breakdown, people start, not everyone, but a significant proportion of people across the society will just go off the reservation. They'll effectively, they will react to in accordance with the stimuli. So, for example, like I said, imagine a state that works well, it remedies grievances well, it runs the society decently well. People basically will stay on the reservation. It's still a reservation then. Bear in mind, someone has their kid attacked and they politely go to court and they accept the harsh sentence and they go, okay, I'd like to have done it myself, but okay, fine. People will basically stay on the farm, the reservation, for better or worse. But in a situation like this, it's effectively that it's kind of like the state is almost chiefly responsible for it. Most people are willing to stay inside the lines, and yet the state is almost kind of it's not that people are going off the reservation. It's that the state are removing the fences. They're removing the tags from the ears. They're sort of, the state is doing it because they're not, much like a farmer farms a farm. They're not farming the farm. The farm is just being left to just go into wild. And so and that's kind of the argument I'm making, is that it's not necessarily even just some populist whatever uprising or something. It's the state. I mean, if pull off the Scooby-Doo mask of who's responsible for all this, as much as the newspaper articles would like to say far right agitators and outside interference and American Twitter posters and all this, the reality is, if you pull off the Scooby-Doo mask, it's the Irish government and all of its various interests. They are the culprit behind all of this, doing it. They're letting the farm go wild, so to speak, and so as they're doing it, for just take for, and I don't mean to describe people who are acting out and people who are aggrieved at the moment as feral. I'm not trying to be derogatory, but it's kind of like, if a farmer abandons a farm with animals on it, and takes down the fence posts and doesn't fill the trough and all of this kind of stuff, the animals, some of them will die, some of them will wander off, and some of them will sort of, a domesticated cow will turn into a more like I'm not really good at animal stuff, but like, it's kind of like chickens and cows. The ones that survive, the ones that are there, will just become wild. They will become feral in order to survive and in order to adapt to their new environment, which isn't actually controlled. It doesn't have structures to it. They will just start to act in accordance with their environment. And that's what's happening with people in Ireland now, across the board. So I'm just to make a note, and I could be missing some, but from what I know, in just the last week anyway, this phenomenon of like alleged, actual, whatever, child snatching, child inappropriateness of some fashion everywhere, from molestation to weird comments or whatever. We've had incidents in Cork, Kildare, Sheriff Street, Dorset Street. These are all Dublin, Grand Canal Dock. And by which I mean, we've had these issues with kids being interfered with in some way, and the person allegedly responsible for it getting laid out on the floor on camera. And again, returning to how I said, that's not normal. You can say, "Oh, good, that's great. People are standing up now," and or a regimist could say, "Oh, we need to crack down on this law and order. We cannot have vigilante." You can have whatever view on it you want, but if you're just an outsider looking in, that's a society that's crumbling and falling apart at the seams. And is it a conspiracy from the government, or are they just that inept and that bought out that it's, the whole thing is rotten to the core? I don't really know, but that's what's happening. And it's not nice. I actually, some people like go, yeah, finally someone's taken action to defend people, to defend themselves on the street or whatever. Well, they are defending themselves, but you know what I mean? Like, people enjoy the seeing justice get met out in some fashion, let's say, right? Especially, of course, if it's children being interfered with, allegedly or actually. People just, the natural, you know how it is. And yet I agree in a sense, but in another way I don't like it. I'd rather, and this is the sort of either or, some NGO person would call me a monster and a lunatic and draconian and all that, but I am actually a believer in the state. I'm not a believer in anarchy, right? I'm not a believer in this state, but the concept of the state. I would prefer a harsh state and no vigilantism and none of this stuff, but a state that's hard, it's tough, it's fair, it's legitimate, and it's uncompromising when it needs to be. So I've talked about this ad nauseum in the past, but the idea that, much like China and other places, where if these spoofer migrants came in, I'm going to read a story in a second, but a spoofer migrant comes in and takes the piss and claims asylum, and they say, "Oh, the Geneva Convention," and they have a immigration solicitor who's an NGO paid by the state, paid by billionaire philanthropies. They refuse to give you their identity, and they say, "Well, technically, this guy told me there's some loophole I can jump through, and I'm going to get a free house." I'd much rather a state that effectively grabs that person by the scruff of the neck and chucks them out, and grabs the immigration solicitor and the NGO and goes, "You're going to jail." And some people would say, "Oh yeah, that's very draconian. What about the law as it is? And what about normal practice and all this stuff?" And I'm just saying, well, I'm actually thinking about this stuff, and I've determined that this stuff is necessary and is, in the context of things, reasonable and the only way to solve it. So you have to basically cut through the society like a hot knife through butter, the society as it is, and completely radically change it. It's actually not radical, it's just a return to normality. But according to the status quo, it's seen as outside of the norm now. And it's maybe harsh. You know, the idea that you take these migrants who shouldn't be here, technically they have leave to remain, but they don't speak any English. They Half of them are criminal, la 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 la. Stuff that any common sense person could look at them and go, why are they in the country, right? My thing would be, you're out. If you don't want to go out, if that's too kinetic and volatile, we're just going to cut any benefits you have. And if you get around that, we're going to cut the loophole you got around. And if you find some other way, we're going to cut that. We're basically going to take action as necessary to a reasonable extent and no more than that. That type of thing, right? And they would call me radical for that. And yet I'm the guy who'll turn around and say, well, you can also have people being decked out on the street for alleged or actual crimes against children or otherwise. You can have that too. So if I say that, then some people would say I'm a softie. Well, I'm not for this sort of wild freewheeling anarchy. And it's kind of a choice. To me, it is a choice to the state that I'm not running any of this stuff. So this is just as an observer, literally, truly. You know, which one is nastier? To me, it's far less nasty that a state just says, listen, under basic rules of policing and order and all of that, no one's acting according to their own passionate will. This is just cold, hard. The state works how it works. You take a migrant and you say, we're not hurting a hair on your head. We're just saying you have to go, right? And if you don't go, I suppose then policing comes into effect. But, and you were taking your stuff, and if you sit around and you just, you know, we're going to do what we have to do to get you out and stop the others from coming in and all of that in an organized, much like China or wherever else like that. We'll just do what we have to do. To me, that's far more preferable and much less harsh. And there's much less of a chance of a person who is caught in the crosshairs wrongly and all of that being wrongly implicated. And that's kind of the other thing. And some of you, the audience here, might kind of call me a bleeding heart for this, but there is an element to me that, again, the basic canons of a civilized society, a fair trial, a bit, all these kind of things, basic, you know, two sides of every story, all of that, basic Christian almost, or just European, and generally any civilized people's sort of rules, so that it's not a madhouse. The idea that an innocent person doesn't get condemned, I think any reasonable person wants that. And what you will have in situations like this, inevitably, when, and again, Scooby-Doo mask off, this is the government's fault. It's not the far right's fault. It's not American Twitter posters. It's not GB News. It's whatever, NATO. It's well, it is, it probably is their fault. It's complicated. But point being, you're inevitably going to have a situation where someone who was accused of one of these things actually didn't. It was just Chinese whispers. It was just, you know, the way a mob tends to work sometimes. Sometimes they get it wrong because of there's someone wrote a book once about the mob, French guy, ages ago. I'd never read it, but I've heard about it. And you're going to have a situation, and most of these cases, you can see, even in the videos, that the people didn't invent it out of thin air. There's a big crowd of people talking about how they saw it and stuff like that. In the majority of cases, it's true, and so it is what it is. But there'll inevitably, with the frustration, there will be a case where some guy who genuinely didn't do anything, migrant, who I agree, and it might be a migrant who shouldn't be here. And if I were a statesman, they wouldn't be here. But regardless, they are here. But they didn't interfere with a kid. They didn't do anything like that. And they end up getting decked onto the ground and kicked in the face and all of that kind of stuff. And there could be a situation where one of them dies or whatever, or even if they're just badly beaten. Now, I'm as draconian as I might be accused of being in terms of policy. I don't want that. I don't want what allegedly happened in Merchants Quay, where a child gets interfered with and sexually molested, and that's shocking. That's my primary concern, that that doesn't happen. That's my priority. But at the same time, I don't want people to have to be put in a position where people take reprisals on the spot because they feel like the state has lost legitimacy. These are not political actors. These are just people on the street. No way connected to me, no way connected to political rhetoric or anything. And it ends up being a case of in the wrong. And to be honest, even in the case where it's the right, we can all agree that you watch that and you say, look, we all watch it and we don't shed tears, right? But I'd rather if the person were harshly, you could even argue that the person should get the death penalty, which would be harsher than a few kicks on the ground, you know, technically. But I'd still rather it be done in that fashion. I'd still rather that. I'd rather a state that takes even a more draconian punishment, maybe, but it's through process and it's not through the mob. But we're in a position where we're losing that. That's going away. And it's, again, it's Scooby-Doo mask. It's the fault of the state. This is what's happening. And I don't know what that's a sign of, just a society that's in a lot of trouble, a state that's in a lot of trouble. They themselves are in trouble because this is just going to escalate. This whole thing is clearly going to escalate. But then it's bad for us. It's bad. And call me the centrist diplomat here, but it's bad for us. And then it's also, it is actually bad for migrants. It's bad for the Irish. That's my primary concern. But then, of course, it is bad for migrants. I want the government to just knock on someone's door, Joseph Puska, one day before he murdered Aisling Murphy, and say, listen, I don't care what passport you have. I don't care what, you don't speak English. You're cycling around your bike. You have a weird history. You don't have a job. And yet you're living in one of our 4 or 5 bedroom houses in Tullamore. Come here, get in the car. Right, we're going. Pack your bags. We're going. Where you're originally from, you're going to get on a plane. You're going to go there, and that's going to be the end of the story. Bye bye. I would take that over what we're facing into now, and yet the state won't let us do that. That's the thing. They won't even let us do 1% of that. That's the problem. So I'll just get into a couple of stories here, and then we'll kind of get towards wrapping it up. We're probably still a ways away from that, but anyway. I see loads of you in the chat. I'm blown away. I don't know, is it because of events or because I'm doing a good job or what it is, but 1,300 in the chat. I'm actually blown away. I suppose I can thank people for watching and all that, but but just in general, I'm pleased to see it, and yeah, thanks for all of you being here. But let's get into some stories anyway. So this kind of sets the tone. A load of ads, okay. I always ask you in the chat and then I never look back whether you can see this or not. Doesn't make a difference, I suppose. It's a story from the Irish Examiner. So this kind of sets the tone of some of the subsequently talk about. It's sort of like a baseline, the bottom of the cake, that everything else sits on in a way. And I might read all of it to you. It's not that long and it's mad. So when we talk about unvetted, you hear all the time people talk about unvetted migrants, and that's the kind of excuse people use to say that they don't want their area being filled up with migrants. It's that they're unvetted and they don't have a passport and they came in without checks and all that. Some people roll their eyes because people are kind of hiding behind that and everything. But this is a case where you see, as much as it's a bit of an excuse for Irish people to hide behind because it's such a genuinely legitimate concern, genuine and legitimate concerns, as they say. And yet, it's real though, right? This is the case where even I, a cynic, narrative or that piece of rhetoric, I look at this and I go, holy shit. I watch this stuff every day and I read through this article and I'm blown away. And my sense of everything I've talked about thus far in the stream, that the state is away with the fairies, rotten through corrupt, whatever, and that it's a farm without fences and without anything in the trough, and the farmer is off on holidays because he's now being paid, I don't know, he's in a Bitcoin scam or something, and he's just not farming anymore. Like this deepens that sense. So I'll just start reading. So the headline is, fingerprint of Cork prison inmate matches 27 names across England and France. Cork District Court heard that the 29-year-old Syrian man's fingerprint was cross-checked through Interpol. So this is mad. A fingerprint for a prisoner at Cork Prison whose identity is unknown to the authorities was cross-checked through Interpol, and it proved to be a match for 27 different names across England and France. So bear in mind, you're the guard. You're in there. It'll mention what crime he committed or whatever, but you're dealing with a criminal. It's your job now. He's in the station. Put him in jail, put him up for court or whatever. He's probably not got any English. He's given a solicitor, the solicitor that you're given or whatever. And then that solicitor, I'm embellishing here, I'm speculating, but maybe that solicitor is joined by an NGO representative, maybe, possibly, and certainly is joined by, I could imagine, a translator. So you have this like little team in the room who are there to defend this guy, and yet you're the guard. Let's say you're not a corrupt piece of shit guard like a lot of them, and you're just saying, I just want to do my job here. Like, I get criminals in, let's say some Irish guy has done something, broken a window, robbed a bank. You bring him in, you go, your name is Jerry Delaney. You've committed a crime. We know who you are. Even if you didn't tell us, it wouldn't take us long to just figure out who you are. Like, so now what happens next is you're going to be put in the cell, bail or no bail, whatever it is, and then you'll go to court and you'll get a sentence. And that's how it works, right? We'll go through the motions. And now you're sitting there with Abdul or whatever the fuck, and he's not speaking to you. He's like, no English, or maybe even, and you say, okay, well, you get the translator and you go, ask him who he is. And he says, goes through it. So I'll read it to you. So Sergeant John Kelleher said at Cork District Court that the 29-year-old man's identity was checked through a fingerprint taken from him, and it matched 6 names in France and 21 identities in England. He has not provided any information on his identity in Ireland, Sergeant John Kelleher said. We don't know who he is, so how can we deal with it? This man has not given any information, documents, or anything. And again, I'll just pause to say, imagine you do this in China. So just to take China's a good example. Again, I wouldn't even get to the airport in China without having registered to go there and stuff in advance or whatever. And I would be thoroughly vetted and all this. And then I could have a holiday for 2 weeks and then I go. But let's say you get to China somehow. You do go there on the premise of a holiday or something like that, and then you disappear into the weeds for a while. No, let's just say you go over the Tibetan plateau or whatever. You get in there, you just basically teleport yourself into the middle of China. You commit the crime. Police officers, Chinese police officers come up, they grab you, bring you in, and they say, so first off, you wouldn't even be afforded the sort of process of like legitimate trial and police custody and safety and all that. You'd probably get battered on the spot to begin with. There's a good chance, let's be honest, right, by batons or whatever, or by the people who find you committing the crime. But let's say you get into the police station, you get that far, and they say in English, let's say one of them has a bit of English, and he goes, "What's your name?" And basically you just look at them and you go, with a little smirk, you just go, I don't know. Where's my solicitor? Where's my translator? Where's my anti-racism advocate? Bring them in there, talk to them. I'll tell you what I want to tell you in a while. I mean, right? You're in jail. You're getting beaten, like But and here's the thing: most people across the world, in any normal common sense view, would look at that and think, well, I mean, that's not exactly banged up abroad where you got caught with 0.5 gram of weed and now you're in jail for 80 years or whatever, getting tortured. That's, most people would agree, well, look, you're bringing that on yourself. I mean, you're in someone's country, you've committed a crime, so we're dealing with layers here, and now you're basically saying fuck you to the police with a smile on your face. I mean, you're lucky. At that point, it's kind of like, and I'm not advocating any, I'm just talking about if you were in the likes of a China, at that point, you've got a death wish. It's like, I mean, what are you trying to do here? But in Ireland, the police have their hands tied, the ones that aren't corrupt anyway to begin with. Everyone's got their hands tied, and there's apparently this rules-based order when it comes to this stuff, but not anywhere else. Not for Irish people, not for migration, not for anything else. When the migrant commits a crime and goes through his bullshit routine, then the rules are sacrosanct, right? So anyway, we don't know who he is. Clown show. So Judge Mary Dorgan told the accused who appeared in court by video link from prison, "You are in custody. Your identity cannot be established. That needs to be done quickly. We're going to need to do that. That's going to be..." I mean, imagine it being in China and them saying, yeah, we're going. So you're already through the judge, the NGO, the solicitor, the translator, the guards, the video call, and all this. Now, how many thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands have been spent on just wages, administration, paperwork, filing, the whole lot on this guy? Like, how, think about how obscene this is, right? Compared to your life where you cross any line and you're gone, and yet apparently this is rules where they have this, that needs to be done quickly. Imagine the Chinese guy telling you that. Defense solicitor Eddie Burke said that the accused gave his name as Yusuf Angelina, adding, I would have thought a fingerprint would have been conclusive. So the solicitor is sort of saying, almost with a cheeky shrug of the shoulders, did you not take his fingerprint? And Sergeant Kelleher said, I have fingerprints as well. I can say I'm Joe Bloggs. So again, if you don't have fingerprints, like fingerprints in isolation don't tell you much. Anyway, Mr. Burke said the accused man came from Syria and arrived in Cork by ferry, he says, at Ringaskiddy. The solicitor said the accused no longer had travel documents. Oh, he doesn't have his travel documents. Now, the NGO has told us that what you say is that they fell down the toilet, or you say that you were persecuted in Gambia because you're bisexual, and before you fled under the barbed wire fence, the homophobic terrorists grabbed your passport, whatever. That's the line. You tell them that, and we know because we have all these little retarded, silly laws. We have all of those figured out, so that's your line. So it's funny, I have to paint inside the lines rhetorically and stuff, but what I will say is that if YouTube ban me, which maybe they will eventually, even though I'm perfect and I do everything right, I will just go to Rumble and I'll be a free man, so whatever. Anyway, so that's the story with the solicitors playing the game. Judge Dorgan said it was a most unusual matter where a person before a court had 27 identities. Do you think? The judge added that he should arrange through friends or family to get his passport or identifying documentation. So we're going to have you back and we're going to ask you to could you grab the passport for us, please? Come on, what kind of farce are we in here? As if the defendant spoke up at Cork District Court on video link from Cork Prison to say, I don't have family, I don't have no one. He says, I don't have family, I don't have no one. So just blanking, basically. Judge Dorgan said he is not being forthcoming. He would need to be thinking about his situation. What is this? There's no discipline. There's no rule. There's no grab this guy and toss him out of the country. And if he's got a nice watch on, we'll take the watch. We'll take the. You owe us now. Like, I mean, you're being kept physically safe. That's a generous act on behalf of this state because of you're actively taking the piss out of us. So we're going to. I mean, any normal state would say they would compel the guy to give them his financial assets, insofar as they exist at all, anywhere from a bank account to a ring on the finger or whatever. You owe us, and you're going to jail. You're going to the gulag, or you're being deported. Whatever. This is just common sense, surely, right? But no. So the judge adjourned the case until May 21st, with the accused remanded in continuing custody. He faces several burglary charges in Cork District Court. So bear in mind that this guy came into the country. He's gotten to this point now where he's taken the piss to this extent. He came in a piss take way, obviously, as well. And then in the meantime, he said, do you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to go around and start robbing people or robbing shops or whatever. And yet this guy is sitting there, happy as a clam. Well, not happy as a clam, but he's in custody. But he's got all the rights and the luxuries. Maybe he's got an Xbox in his cell, and he's facing no immediate deportation charge or any of that. This is mental. And again, we get back to people getting laid out on the floor across the country and the sense of the collapsing legitimacy of the state and all that. This is case in point of that. How can people read this and not start to go crazy, start to get very frustrated, we'll say, and interested in taking their vote to the ballot box and casting it in a different way. Yeah, he's charged with stealing a bike at the Ensign Bar, Monkstown, on January 26, stealing another bicycle from another location in Monkstown, and stealing one at Ringaskiddy. He's also charged with having cannabis for his own use. Finally, he is charged with failing to produce a valid. I mean, just nuts. I'll get to the next story here. I'm just going to race through stories here because I don't want to go on too. I don't want to go on too long. Is what I meant to say. And this is from Mick O'Keefe here. He just put these videos together very effectively with a little commentary. I'll play it for you now. Mick O'Keefe on Twitter. Follow him. Everyone follows him already. I'll give you his tweet. He said, 3 immigrant camps have been cleared in 3 months. The Irish government is acutely aware of how bad the optics are. I believe we'll see a lot more smaller camps popping up around Dublin. And I'm going to get into this, but this is just a primer. So I was going to do this myself earlier. I edit the different videos together. Mick had done it with excellent commentary, so we'll just watch his. So basically there were, I mean, I'm doing this backwards, but maybe I should actually, but there was a migrant encampment, most of you know this, tent outside the IPAS Centre in Dublin, the central building where migrants make their claims and all of that. And basically they had, it ended up where you had like 40, 50, however many tents outside. You had portaloos, you had people shitting on the street effectively. You had, it was just nuts. Migrant encampment, think Paris, think whatever. Excuse me. You had that, which I think is hilarious, outside the International Protection Centre. And basically, at one point, they cleared it for the rumor was that there was an Ireland match, all the rugger buggers, right, going to see the match. And that wouldn't look good. Or maybe it was for St. Patrick's Day. Maybe it was both, with like Americans coming over. They wanted to put on a brave face. So they cleared the camp, they put the tents in a bin, and they brought the migrants up out to the fringe of Dublin / Wicklow. And the migrants made their way back for unspecified reasons. I believe that they're playing some game where if they hang around long enough, they'll get a free house. Anyway, they came back like pigeons to where they were, the shit heap outside the IPAS Centre. And that was that for a while. And then, if I'm getting the timeline correct, then the government came back and cleared it again and put a fence, like a Harris fence or whatever, around the entire IPAS Centre where the tents had previously been pitched. A fence. Now, let me just remark on how mad that is. Ordinary Irish people, 80% of us, basically all of us, are begging and pleading with the government to just have a normal immigration policy, like China, like wherever, right? Just a normal, sensible policy according to what people want, which is effective at preserving demographics, stopping random people from coming in, helping the housing crisis. Just stop these people coming in. I'll get onto this in a bit more, actually, because it's not just open borders, it's way worse. But they won't do it. These guys, like Mr. Yusuf, whatever, came in and started robbing bikes in Cork. Obviously came in, passport, handed over to the trafficker in a box or whatever it is. They have that going on, or coming there from Belfast, whatever. They have that going on. So they won't do a border in Ireland. And by border, I mean a border in terms of the rules. A border isn't a big fence necessarily, but in a sense, a fence around the country to people, a filter to stop people you don't want coming in, a fence, a border. They won't do that. But then when the migrants who the IPAS Centre themselves are responsible for bringing in and having this scenario happen, then they themselves end up clearing the migrants away from them, which is what we want to do with the country, but they won't do. But they clear it away from their office. And then what we want is, in a sense, a fence around the country. They won't do that, but they'll put a fence around their own office, they being the people who are creating this situation, which the irony of that is just beautiful, right? But that's what happened. So then they went to the Grand Canal, which is 2 minutes walk away, right? The Grand Canal, which is where all the posh tech people and students and all this go have a ironic bag of cans and go to the barge and get mimosas after work and all this kind of stuff. And yummy mummies and joggers and all this kind of stuff go do their walks and whatever, live the good South Dublin life. Or have a flat white by watching the swans or whatever. So now they're down there, and that, of course, that won't do either. So that went on for a few days. Now they've been cleared, and a fence has been put up around that area of the canal, and so it's just basically turning into Tom and Jerry. And with the authorities such as they are, and these migrants such as they are, So what you've gotten to know is there's, again, it's whack-a-mole, it's Tom and Jerry, and now the migrants are sort of diffusing out into just smaller locations. They're just kind of setting up here, setting up there, setting up here, setting up there. And so it is. So let's watch Mick's video now.
And this is why, look at this. Look. So for the third time this year, the third time in 3 months, Tent City has been removed and the strange foreign men have been dispersed. So the first one happened on the 16th of March, the second one then on the 1st of May, and then today then. So these camps are springing up as fast as they're being taken down, and that's because there's so many people coming in. Now this here, see this here, I think that's what we're looking at more in the future. Instead of seeing large encampments because the government are going to tear them down, we're going to see a lot more of these smaller ones dispersed all around the city. This one, for example, is right outside of mother's doors. You can hear her daughter's terrified. Looking out your front door, there's 3 fucking strange Africans sitting there. And this is why, look at this, look at the numbers. 610 came in the last 7 days. Look at the amount of Nigerians claiming asylum in Ireland. Look at that graph. This is unsustainable. 222 Nigerians in a week. So for the third time this year.
Yeah, that's an excellent synopsis there. 52 seconds and so much packed into it. Mick O'Keefe on Twitter, if you don't follow him already. He, like probably a lot of us as well, have recently been suppressed by Twitter. So anyway, so that's that. And then you have, not loading very quickly. So I'll just, the other day I posted a video of Val, a Dublin activist. She's great. Basically confronting Kitty Holland, but she had this moment where the migrants were saying this thing you hear all the time, for example, with the smirk on the face where they say no English, right? And sometimes it's a security guard with no PSA badge. You know, I'm Guardian Angel and all this, right? Like we saw with Phil Dwyer up in Wicklow. But the one they love, right, because they know that the state has their back and is oppressing us. They say, when someone says, so where are you from? Ordinarily you'd say I'm from what's a country with an actual war? I mean, most of them are grand, really. But like, you know, you say, listen, I'm from Sudan, there's a war, it's terrible. I can't wait to go back to Sudan. I love Sudan. I'm a Sudanese patriot. I love my country and I want to get back to my family or whatever it is. I want to get back to my country. I'm here temporarily and I'm grateful to be in your country. I know this pressure's on you, but I you know, I appreciate it. There's friction. Basically something along the lines of like, I'm from here, you're from Ireland, I respect your country, and I'm sorry that this affects you in a way, but I'm just fleeing for my life and I'll be back as soon as I can. And that kind of, you know, magnanimity and respect, right? They don't do that. They say, I Irish, with the smirk, right? And then like, basically that's the biggest fuck you imaginable. And here we have, this is a whole lot of people have views on this, but Ezra Levant, Rebel News, he took a trip to Dublin apparently for the protest to do interviews or whatever, and he went. This is kind of surreal actually, because you know him being who he is and stuff. He goes down the canal. It's just, I never thought years ago I'd be saying Ezra Levant, right? Is in between like his Israel, I don't know, propaganda or whatever it is, and his Rebel News. He's down the Grand Canal. Anyway, so he is, and he's going down there anyway to get video or whatever. And it doesn't really matter. It could have been anyone. I mean, I'm sure the guy didn't know who he was or what he was or whatever. But as far as your man's concerned, to be honest, he probably thinks Ezra Levant is just another Irish person walking up to him. Anyway, that's irrelevant. A guy walks up to him and says, basically Ezra Levant says, what's the crack? Who are you? Or tell me, do you want to talk or whatever? And the guy does more of the same.
It's not fucking business.
Now, bear in mind, just again, I'll emphasize, because this is kind of rage bait, but it's real. This is, I've spoken to these people, I've had these interactions myself, and it's mad when you're on the spot. I'm telling you now, talk about blood boiling. This guy in his kicks here, right, and his whatever, you know, like, again, you're back to China or somewhere like that. Do you think they'd have someone like this cockily walking around their country acting like this towards people? When someone says, hey, where are you from? So where are you from? Tell me where you're from. Going, I'm Chinese, fuck you. You know, that kind of thing, right? Or I'm from Beijing, fuck you. That's basically the play here.
Why is it? Well, why is it not my business?
Oh, by the way, I'm showing you this because this is from nearby the canal. Well, it is actually on the lower end of the canal, but yeah. So this is just relevant to this encampment situation, right? What I'm saying is that it's not some woman who comes out and says, I described the magnanimous archetype a while ago, but or let's say it's a woman with a child in the tent who says, "Oh, I'm fleeing this, but my husband's at home fighting the war, and if luckily he survives, we'll go back to our loving father and husband, and we can't wait. And if he doesn't, we'll be going back to our family. But we were sent over here, so and we're here in the tents, and I know it's not great and everything, and I know." In a situation like that, even as the staunchest anti-migration person, you'd be like, well, on a human respect level, I mean, policy-wise, I'm not in favor of what's going on here, but at a human level, yeah. But no, this is the type of person who's being carted around the place.
Why is it? Well, why is it not my business?
I'm from Dublin.
You from Dublin?
Yeah.
Look at the
All
strut.
right. Is
All
that
right.
good for you?
Sure.
Okay. Fuck off, man. Hey, bro. Instead of filming people, go to gym, man. You filming people, go to gym. Fuck off, yeah. Fuck off, you motherfucker. It's my fucking business.
Why is it? Well, why is it not my business?
I'm from Dublin.
You from Dublin?
Yeah.
Did he do
People go
pulse
to
grabber?
gym,
Did I
man.
imagine that?
You filming
Like,
people, go
oh.
to gym. Fuck off, yeah. Fuck off, you motherfucker. It's my
I thought I saw that in the original one.
Why is it? Well, why is it not my business?
This kind of
Dublin.
fuck
You from
you,
Dublin?
Yeah.
hockey.
All right. Is
All
that
right.
good for you?
Sure.
I'm just watching it again. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Right?
Fuck off, man.
I mean,
Hey, bro.
so you're telling me that we're meant to just say, oh, no bother. Rings End and Pier Street and all these working class communities they're not able to get the government to just remove people like this. In Pier Street, the Battle of Pier Street, whenever it was, I was there, maddest. I've been even at the Dublin riots were mad, but I think there was an energy there that was mad, right? The motorbikes revving, smoke everywhere, going under the Dart tunnel. I think that was one of the most aesthetic and I don't know, mad moments of my life. I think being there, the energy was so tense and crazy at that. But they had to do that. They had to go out and fend for themselves because bear in mind, Munsa, whatever his name is, the Turkish terrorist guy, he had been swinging iron rods at people. There had been this like circus going on for days there. And it ended up with people coming out en masse and then the riot guards blocking it all off. And they had to effectively come out in numbers like it was a battle and then negotiate with the guards thinking there's so many of us here, there's such a volatile situation. And effectively the guards, I think, sort of in the to prevent mayhem from breaking out, sort of agreed that they would get rid of them. And that's why, because if they didn't do it, the people were going to do it. It was kind of like that. So that's how that was sort of resolved in the moment. And all of these it was hilarious. These whatever you want to call them, lefty people from Trinity were there with them, and they all ran back and got escorted by the guards, literally back into the gates of Trinity College. I couldn't have made it up. I couldn't have written that as a satire. But that's what Pier Street had to do. And yet when they're at Mount Street and the Grand Canal and elsewhere in South Dublin, of course, they're moved on by the early morning raids where, I don't know, I'd love to see how they're dragged out of the tents. The tents are carted away, the NGO-funded tents. And then they get moved on and a big fence gets put up and it's all diplomatic. Not one South Dublin individual or Ranelagh dweller had to go out on the street and in a sense degrade themselves by having to go out themselves. They didn't have to do it. The state was there. The mechanics of the state were there to act on their behalf so that they didn't have to sully themselves. But no, it's different for a Rings End. It's different for Pier Street, these working class communities. But these are the type of people you're dealing with anyway, suffice it to say. Change my camera thing there. So what's next? I don't want to bore you to death here with stuff, but yeah, Grand Canal cleared of tents, so fences up. I'm going to race to the rest of what I have here. I tend to go on too long. Do I go on too long? I don't know. Fences up outside the iPass. What am I on to next? Yeah, RMTV, great channel on Twitter. Real Message Era has here they're scattered around basically. So these encampments now are scattered around, and this comes back, by the way, to my opening premise of the chaos and the tinderbox that is Ireland at the moment, with the state being fundamentally responsible. So all these different places with the migrant encampments now are just kind of diffusing out to everywhere. A few tents here, a few tents there. And again, who's in the tent? Is it a lovely little mammy with her baby? No, it's like the guy there grabbing his balls and saying, fuck you. That's who you've got. Do you really want them in tents, like underneath a little little bridge thing near your house or whatever? Do you really? So I mean, I want to consult the chat here. I can do some more stories. I could leave it there. This would be a nice, neat stream if I kind of left it there, talking about just that story. But there's like there's a couple of things I could go with as well. Yeah, someone says people can ramble on if they, or sorry, people can leave if they want to. My only issue is that I'll just get into it. Is that that's well and good for now, but what happens then is that the stream is sitting there in posterity, and it's sort of more like a rambling, overly long thing. You know what I mean? If I stopped right now, this would be a nice little video on point. I don't know. And most people in the chat want me to keep going. Fair enough. You can always leave if you want, I suppose. But okay, so this is just maybe less of a big thing than the previous story, but it's relevant to stuff that's happening too. So Michael McDowell, who's the arch like I'm respectable and you're not sort of right-wing regime voice out there. He always has been since as long as since I was like a child. I remember this guy popping up on the news and everything, right? He was part of the RTE, the in-group, some sort of political elite or whatever. He just was, just like any of the rest of them. But he was kind of he was like in support of stopping the stopping the birthright citizenship back in the early 2000s. But he's an interesting character, but he makes an argument here, which is, and I'm not saying he took it off me, of course he didn't, but it's this Ireland's capacity to control migration in a sustainable way is broken. And you could say it's kind of like everything I've been saying in, let's say, the last week or just in general, but kind of refined into this sort of respectable article. He's refining my points. I'll summarize what he says, which is basically that we have a migration system. According to him, migration on the whole is good. But the problem is that you're conflating economic migration with the asylum system. And it's something I kind of hinted at earlier, which is that it's what we have is much worse than open borders. People used to sort of, talk about that like it was the rapture or whatever. We're going to have open borders one of these days. People used to say that, but what we have is much, much worse, because open borders, for example, would get to a saturation point where life becomes so sort of unlivable in general in Ireland, so hard to get a house, so hard to do this, so hard to do everything, that migrants, even from sort of poorer countries, would just go, there's just no place for me here. The sponge is saturated, right? But with this asylum gig, you get put in hotels, you get modular houses built for you. Kind of the government goes out of its way as a side point, 2.3 billion euro. Unbelievable. It basically directs the lifeblood of its economy and its capacity towards this project, almost like a wartime economy. And they create this at least two-tier system whereby these people have the 1951 convention rights and 500 million rights that have been added since. And so they're entitled to this and that and the other. And there's a whole machinery and a whole industry and personnel and all that ready to facilitate that. And so any migrant can come in. And then you get to the point, of course, where there's no actual functioning criteria to be an asylum seeker besides the fact that you're not Irish. That's basically it. So if you're a non-Irish economic migrant coming in, you can basically enter into this shadow state, this kind of parallel state, what's the word? Social safety net or something like that. That is much better than the existing one, and you can just parachute yourself into that. But Irish people can't. That's the only criteria. If you're Irish, you can't. Anyone else basically can. Even we're seeing someone from Liverpool, a fellow with a big Liverpool accent recently. It's just insane. But he makes that argument, and he said basically my argument, but like kind of refined down to like the core of the argument. Granting the regime its all its basic premises, but just saying, listen, this kind of element is crazy. In a sense, he's not referring to me, but it's as if he's taking my rhetoric, and just taking just the bit that no one could ever disagree with, and just focusing on that. And he comes back to his conclusion. I'm getting to a point, but he says, but in truth, the core problem lies in collective EU failure to distinguish between economic migration and outdated and unsustainable Geneva Convention asylum protections. Until that is done at EU level, chaos will continue. And here's the key, the final line of the article. He says, the beneficiaries will be malign political actors, domestic and external. So basically the far right or whatever is what he's saying. And I just find it mad because it's like, okay, so you're respectable, you're the respectable critic, and I'm not. Now he doesn't make it clear what makes me an extremist, a lunatic, whatever it is. What exactly? And I have, this is the thing I always kind of criticize John McGurk for, and he has his whole criticism of the so-called far right and everything. But again, the thing I always come back to is like, what exactly is it? Let's not go with, a tweet Garrod made in 2019 out of like 10,000 tweets he's made, and here's the one we're going to hang him with, and this kind of nonsense. That's not, just in terms of my stated actual views in context as they are. Which element of what I'm saying is totally so unreasonable and so extreme as to be outside of polite society or whatever? Even though, and not to brag or whatever, I have a big stream tonight. I have an audience, and a lot of people respect what I say and all that kind of stuff, or some people do. So you have an audience, you have a platform. It's bigger than mine because you're mainstream and you're on RT and all that. But let's take all these factors out of it and just go to the substance of what's being said. I go further than you. I don't grant that migration is a fundamental good. I don't grant all these things. But that's just a view. I have a view. You have a view. There are, for example, I'm speaking kind of to Michael McDougall here. There are many people out there. You could say they're radical, crazy lefties, whatever. But there's people out there who say Michael McDougall is a crazy anti-immigration person, and he has views that are hurtful towards migrants and borders. He even mentions it, that lefties say borders kill and all of that. That's a view, ideological left-wing viewpoint. So according to them, and according to a lot of people, or a certain segment of people, Michael McDougall is in favor of letting people suffer in their own countries, and he has this bourgeois concept of borders and all this. And so to them, he is a barbarian. And so it's all relative. So we have to strip all that away and just come back to the views and say, well, at its core, what makes him extreme to the lefty, or some sort of satanic figure or whatever? It's not quite clear. I mean, he's just got a view, and he can defend his views and discuss them and debate them, and that's it. Well, the same goes between Michael McDougall and someone like me. What's the, at its core, what is it that I say? I disagree that migration is a fundamental good. Well, we can discuss that, right? We can discuss all of these things. I believe that demography is important, that the historic native Irish population, which can be debated, but generally the native population deserves at least to be the majority in the country, the founding populace of the country, which is the norm in China. It's the norm in most countries in the world, historically and geographically, in the current era. That's actually not extreme. It's a norm. It's a total norm across the world and among people. So, and it's completely doable even now, without having to hurt people or all of this kind of stuff. So again, it can be debated. What is it? Where he would talk about the lefties who try to create this sort of demon class to their right or whatever. And what I would say is, when you talk about malign political actors, clearly it's referring to the likes of me and the likes of you in the chat and the likes of Philip Dwyer and Keith Woods and you name it, right? People who are seen as whatever, outside the party, so to speak. Well, what is it? I mean, would you not like to debate the lefties who call you a demon and say that, look, I just have a view and it's on the table? Does that not apply to someone like me? Does that not apply to all of us? We are in a situation where we've this guy in the Garda station in Cork. We have boys being allegedly / actually whatever sexually raped in toilets in Cork. We have people here, like the guys gesturing to Ezra Levant. We have all these people in our country. We've had millions of people at this point, 1 million plus, way too many people brought into this country in the depths of a housing crisis, and it's a disgrace. It's a disaster, and people are suffering across the board. Now, So if you actually look at it in an objective light, what I'm saying, which is more than what Michael Dula is saying, is perfectly rational response to this kind of stuff. Even if you disagree with it, it's a rational, normal response to it. It's a sort of a, you could say it's an out there response to an out there reality or something like that. That'd be generous of me. You could say that, but and yet there's this sort of line drawn, and I just basically what I'm saying is I think that's bullshit and I'm against it. It's kind of, I'd like to see all my tabs here. I like to have them so that one flows into the other, right? So I have a point here. So there's again, I don't like going around calling everyone I disagree with controlled opposition, but if they're going to be going out calling people unsavory, vague terms, unsavory characters, elements, riffraff, all this kind of stuff, right? As they always do, this kind of like never naming people, never naming exactly what it is. What is it? Is it the demographic argument? Is it the harsher form of deportation? Is it the fact that we don't believe a passport is sacrosanct in all cases? Which element is it? You name it, and you name the person who espoused the argument. You name the things, and then we can have a discussion. But it's this kind of like holding the nose. There's elements out there. It's just such bullshit, I'm really sick of it. And they're it's nonsense. So there's this Irish Examiner article, "As the drumbeat of hate grows, blah blah blah." It talks about the far right and this and that. It's nonsense. It's boring, right? But you get to the bottom, and there's a piece that's stuck, a little small, what's the word, stanza. We used to say that in secondary school. There's a paragraph that stuck out to me, because they're talking about security sources. Say there's 20 far-right agitators, and security sources mention Anders Breivik, and they mention this and they mention that, and whatever, blah, 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 the usual, right? But it gets, these articles are interesting, probably for no one but the likes of us, because they're directed kind of at us. I imagine the average reader would get like 5 lines into it and be like, whatever. But they also do tell, they're kind of like messages to us. I find they're very often like they're trying to scare people. For example, people are being monitored physically and digitally, and it's kind of like little mob letter to people. I find they're basically, if you read between the lines, it's almost like a DM sometimes. And they will also admit things via their security source. They'll admit things, will stick out to you. So here's a bit. They're talking about it's at the end. It's about the electoral prospects. They say, excuse me. So, I mean, where is it? Fuck's sake. So they're talking about, the electoral thing. They're talking about the electoral thing as if it's a security concern, right? Of course, that's kind of silly, because we're supposed to live in a democracy. Everyone gets a view, everyone gets a voice. So why would you, if you're an electoral candidate or faction and you're not breaking any law, because of course if you were, you'd be in jail. So you're not breaking a law, you're an electoral candidate with a view, and yet security services are talking about you to the media as if it's some sort of like a terrorism threat or something like that. So that on its face is kind of weird. But they do talk about politics as if it is so. And what they say is, with the election, there is more talk from politicians about not being. Okay, I'll get to the bit I'm actually looking for. Where is it? I could have sworn it was at the end. Bear with me. Damn you. Oh, it was at the end. Okay. Oh, there it is. So, more broadly, concerns in relation to immigration and asylum have become a dominant issue in Ireland. As reported recently in the Irish Examiner, a Eurobarometer survey showed that migration and asylum were a big issue. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, this is the bit. So security sources said the far right have been able to establish a foothold in the political space regarding concerns over immigration levels, the asylum process, and border controls. Okay, fine. Here's the quote from the security source. The government ceded territory in this space, and the left have labelled all those concerned about immigration as racists or far right. So far, I completely agree with that statement, of course. He goes on. So it's become polarized with little space in the middle. I agree, one source said. And then he says, the government is trying to take back some of that territory now, as have independents. Now, so why would a security source who's treating people who are not breaking any laws or anything, people who just have basically a principled position against mass immigration and population replacement, and they believe it, they're not agents, they're not political actors, they're not cynics, they're not opportunists, they're none of that. Someone like Derek Bly or Phil Dwyer, and there's loads of others. There's loads of others, right? There are real people who just clearly believe what they do, and they have no relationship at all with the state, no history, no any of that. They're hitherto normal people who became engaged on an issue and are now in politics. No background, no connections, no family, no institutional connections, any of that. Those are the people who they're basically the security sources are talking about, as if it's a terrorism threat, but it's just people who, basically the line they distinguish is people who are some sort of opportunist or agent or operative who is effectively, loosely or directly connected to the state and performing a role. And then there's people who just believe it. They're running for election or they're speaking on YouTube or whatever. And the problem that the state security services have with them, as opposed to other actors, is that these people actually just believe it. They do it even through being punished. They don't really make money from it. And they don't gain anything. They go through effectively persecution for it, and yet they still do it because they've got this secret ingredient called they just believe what they're saying and they actually want to change it. That's, to them, that puts you in the far right category. And then the not far right category, even though it's not exactly clear what the rhetorical difference is necessarily, is the other people. Anyway, so the same people who are talking about me or Derek Blyer, they don't name names, but people, we can surmise what they're talking about. As a security threat, they say the government is trying to take back some of that territory now, as have independents. They don't say these independents are also a so-called security threat. These independents are a problem. They don't. They speak about them like, no, they're on the reservation. They're us. We're okay with them. That's troubling. Sources predict blah blah blah, but it got me thinking about like the likes of I'm not saying Michael McDowell's a Fed or any of this, but when he draws these lines, as I've described, they're arbitrary. You have to, and then the state security services are talking about, oh well, the independents are there, and that's all good. There's another quote here actually, which, yeah, this is important too. Sources predict the quote far right vote, unquote, vote is splintered with so many candidates standing in local and European elections. And here's the quote from the so-called security source. Maybe the increased number of independents might help moderate things and soak up some of the anti-immigrant sentiment. So it's not that they would take the anti-immigrant sentiment, get elected, and then act upon their elected mandate and power and enact change according to the people that voted them in some way. It's that they would soak it up. Now that's complete cynicism. And so if you look at someone like, Michael McDowell talking like, these people who draw this line that apparently there's the verboten people, there's some sort of arbitrary reason why on this big spectrum of views, why certain views fall into this untouchable blacklisted category, and then other views, which are kind of related, but just slightly distinct in strange ways, are acceptable, good. I don't know. You have to start wondering about that a little bit. And there was a line here. I know I'm going on there, and I am. I'm looking at people who, like, right after when I said I'd stop, views went down. So maybe I should have. But anyway, I shouldn't worry too much about that. But so there was an article in Unheard and about the direction of the anti-mass immigration movement in Ireland, analysing it and all that. Good article, but there was a respondent on Twitter made a great point. It's related to what I'm talking about here. This respondent said, just like in the UK and Italy and elsewhere, right-wing parties will be funded and supported to capture the insurgent populist energy and then promptly and efficiently do away with anything that would otherwise challenge the globalist regime agenda. And I'll return to the article, to soak it up, right? To just soak it up and piss it away to nowhere, basically. No threat, no security threat, allegedly, to the Irish Examiner. That's something that people have to be cognizant of, I know I keep mentioning them and all that. People vote for who they want to, and it is what it is. But I saw a few days ago on a stream, I mentioned Pater Tobin, and in passing I said, oh, the media, the reason he gets kind of clout is because given that there's 80% sentiment against immigration in Ireland, let's say, or whatever, everyone's against it, and yet nobody can kind of say it. What you'll see is articles regularly of like someone like Pater Tobin. You won't find this for Derek Bly or anyone, and it's not because they're not TDs. you'll see articles where it's Padder Tobin slams government on immigration fiasco or whatever. And now that's going to be on shelves in petrol stations all over the country and whatever. So people are going in, seeing the newspaper or buying it and going, oh, finally someone's talking about it or whatever. Padder Tobin's the guy, just like in a play where one person plays one character, another person plays another. He's my guy on immigration. I don't scroll Twitter all day. I don't do these things. And I'm not politically literate that much, but that's true. I'm glad he slams the government. Finally, someone speaking a bit of common sense and all this kind of stuff. And it was only, I mentioned that as a hypothetical because I felt like I had seen things like that around. And then it was like the following day, this is in the last week, I saw an article that literally used like those words. It was Tobin slams Harris on immigration, whatever. It was something to that effect. And I thought, this is mad. And then I put in Padder Tobin slams in Google, and it was Padder Tobin slams. And it's kind of like you go, well, clearly, and then of course he comes out with this sentiment that, like Mike Dool, I'm not really against immigration at all. I'm not Farah. I'm not none of these things. I just think like the government should have a bit more common sense and efficiently process people, accept some and, you know, deport others or decline others. And I keep saying this, but it's like, well, that's what Simon Harris says. So in effect, there's not much difference, but they are being plastered up there as the anti-immigration poster boys on the newspaper, on the TV every second night and all of this. And then someone like John McGurk comes in after the fact, scoffs at the like of me and says, well, you're just not really effective. You're not speaking to the core audience and you're not being reasonable and all of this. Whereas clearly the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Look at Padder Tobin, look at Michael McDowell. And therein lies the game, right? That it's like, well, it's always going to be like that if that's the setup, if the regime, effectively, the media and the state operation kind of has it set up that way. And if state security services are talking about having certain figures who are, these ones are okay, soaking up the sentiment, soaking up implies that not really interested in it. And then other people, for indeterminate reasons, are untouchable. You can't even mention their name. They didn't say, we have a, you know, the Examiner article didn't say, oh, there are threats and people we don't like, and their names are Derek Blind, Gerard Murphy, and Keith Woods, and Phil. They don't mention, no nothing. Even as an opposition character, they don't mention you because they know that I would give you credit, etc. So it's like, it's just one of those things that is kind of like a prepared thing. And some people would say, well, what are you going to do about that? Why don't you just play the N2 game where you're like a Fine Gael or whatever? The Joe Bloggs character criticizes me on this. I think it's silly, but and I could go on about it in detail, but I think it's self-evident. But someone would say, well, what are you to do? It's kind of it's insoluble. What's your answer to that? And what I would say is, as a sincere voice, I would say that instead of just accepting that and saying, oh, well, they're really good at being like Fine Gael and the party machine and all of this, and that's the only reason why, as opposed to it being a setup, really. The answer isn't to just kind of lower the head about that. The answer is to change with your voice as best you can the understanding and the narrative within the country. That's all you can do. Even if no one gets elected in June, I wouldn't, and someone like McGurk gets to say, see, I told you so, I wasn't just talking shit, proof of the pudding is in the eating and all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't say, oh, well, I suppose you're right, because I see how the sausage is made, and it's not acceptable to just go along with that and fait accompli on that. The answer is to change the narrative among the people. And I would say the narrative was changed on NGOs slowly but surely over time. Pressure was built, narrative. I myself took part in it. NGOs. The idea in Irish towns, and this is a radical success, that within your Irish town, and this is old hat, but within your town, you cannot have someone who's connected to an NGO or connected to, I've even forgotten the name of them, I used to know all this, these different agencies and actors who are subversive within your community. I remember a time thinking that idea is so complex and hard to believe and sort of multifaceted that there's no sort of mimetic way that you can just get people to understand that. I tried, but I used to have in the back of my mind this feeling that like it's hard to get like an average person in a town to understand this, and I would see every time they don't get it. But then eventually over time, through repetition, eventually it caught on, and people actually in towns who would very quickly catch up to this, or even better, sometimes they would know it in advance. or at least a certain amount of people within the town would know it and spread that idea to everyone else. So the power of ideas is real, and it doesn't have to just work through RTE and NGOs and Michael McDowell and Pater Tobin slams Simon Harris. It doesn't just have to go through that. In organic ways, you can actually grindingly over time change the consciousness of a whole people bit by bit, with, and not just me or not just anybody in particular, but with thousands of people acting online, acting in real life, spreading the idea, spreading the word. That actually can happen, crazy as it sounds in this day and age of control, state control. That can happen. So the same can happen with the idea that, like, trying to transmute this idea that it's not a case of there's real sincere actors and there's feds. It's not as black and white as that, but just transfer this idea that, listen, you're not going to change anything in Ireland by always deferring to the person that gets shoved up in front of the news on the newspaper in front of you and says the most basic thing shorn of anything else and whatever. That's not your go-to. Your go-to is actually to drift towards and err towards the person who the media and everyone else says is verboten and bad and you can't and they're far right and they're blacklisted. Your instinct should be, in a general sense, to err towards that. And that's reasonable. So I don't know, it's just one of those things that, like, it might, maybe I'll, on this whole premise, there'll be bad news in June because of that. But the answer is not to say, oh, well, I bet we better all become Michael McDowell and Pater Tobin, because that's going to go nowhere anyway. You'd be better off just hammering on the door of the narrative until Chucky law kind of thing, our day comes. And that there's no failure in that. It's just real people who believe real things, advocating for real change. Simple enough. But I'm going on, aren't I? You know, I could have made this 2 streams. I could have had an easy stream prepared for tomorrow night. In future, I'm cutting my streams. That's what I'm doing. Do you know what? I'm actually going to do it now. There's a story. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow night. I think that's what I'm going to do, because these go on too long. It's hard for other viewers. So yeah, it's against my instinct, because I'd ramble forever, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to leave it. There's more to talk about tomorrow night, and I will do that. So thanks for bearing with me through my rambles thus far. I will read your super chat, which I am very appreciative of your support and your contribution, both just your comments in general as well. So John H gives €5, no comment. Thanks very much. Imperator Scrot, I can never say it. I'm gonna have to practice it. I will, because it's hard not to say it, but Scrotarum, good guy, very sound. Thank you very much. Gives €6 and says another nationalist protest should be called now while the momentum is on our side. Yeah, perhaps. It was good. You know, Monday was really good. I was very pleased with it. Had a great time. It's weird because, not to act the celebrity, because it's only within a niche group or whatever, but this is kind of true for a lot of people maybe, but you know, when especially when you're recognized because of streams and online and Twitter and all that, you're kind of saying hi to people a lot, because people know you and you don't know them, and it's nice to talk to people, but it's mad. I mean, I don't want to sound like vain or something, but it's such an overwhelming experience where you kind of get chatting to people and it's great, and yet you want to chat to everyone. If it was like a festival in a field for 2 days, or in a hotel or something for days on end, and there was just loads of time to get around and talk to everyone you want to talk to, people you know, people you recognize, people who you don't know who come up to you, and just spend a good amount of time chatting away. And yet it's because it's a demo, it's just so frantic. There's people everywhere, and you feel like if you left and you didn't really get a chance to kind of chat to people properly and all of that. It's a mad experience, but I look forward to the next one anyway. And thanks for your super chat. Kevin gives €12, no comment. Thank you very much. Damien J. Moran. I don't know. I hope you're all okay with the names. So I hope you don't think you're giving these like anonymously or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to. It is what it is. These are how super chats work. So €10 and says the globalists want what we have and wars are dirty. True. Roddy Murray, who did great videography from Monday, excellent video online, gives €10 and says, I hope liberals are happy with themselves now that posh areas are being overrun with the problem they helped to create. It'll be interesting to see which of them adopt our talking points. Yeah. They all will eventually. That's the idea. They'll all adopt our talking points when we're in power. Say it, you know. But the Irish priestess gives €11 and says, we are not governed, we are ruled and controlled by oppressors that take their orders from the EU, WEF, end of. Yeah, I don't know. It's such a crazy thing. EU, WEF, this, that, and the other. All of these different global institutions. People even debate that, like, oh, is it this, is it that? But at the end of the day, it's all the same. It's the same idea. Yeah, I agree. We're just not governed. It's a complete shot through Comprador ruling class, and we are effectively on our own, and the country is going feral because of it. So F. Aaron Carthy gives €5. Thank you very much. And says the National Party has 9 articles, and number 9 is the execution of an individual on conviction of an extremely heinous crime. Any view on this? I mean, that question is effectively just what's your view on the death penalty, I suppose. I mean, I don't have a prepared sort of treatise on the death penalty, but I think I'm generally in favor of it. Again, I'd need to watch some debates or read some literature on it to kind of go over it, because there's the idea of false convictions, and there's a lot of stuff to do. It's a complicated issue, but I think in general, my view is someone who commits an extremely heinous crime and the guilt beyond reasonable doubt, the standard is even raised higher, let's say, for something like that, where it's doubled up, something like that, where it's really, really, really tight. Of course, there could be mistakes, but in general, it's a really high bar. It's like CCTV, fingerprints, witnesses, the whole lot, everything. And it's just, especially with modern technology and cameras and DNA and all that, it's beyond any reasonable doubt in the highest sense that this person did do what they are accused of, and they are scumbags, and they've done something horrible to children or killed people or whatever. I suppose I don't really see, like, putting them in a cell at great expense for 50 years or whatever. I just don't see the point. Someone like that is just someone like that. I've always felt as well as that there's like with child molesters and I'm not, I don't know, like, someone who like looked at a kid the wrong way in the park or made some passing comment or something like that, that people might knock someone out for. I mean, that's fair enough or whatever, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the most heinous child killers and rapists. My view is that they're a danger to society. They're not worth the cost of incarcerating them. And there's also, call this a Christian instinct or something, there's also an element to me that thinks that there's something so deeply wrong within that person that it's almost a kindness to put them out of their misery legally through state action. We're having a discussion about the death penalty. I feel like there's an element of that it's kind of like a rat in the house or a rabid dog or something, that it's like, listen, this creature isn't capable of living in a harmonious and healthy way. This is some sort of rotten egg, some misfire, and there's almost a cleanliness in just getting rid legally within the law through a legal death penalty. So that's kind of my view about people who are that way. There's something wrong with them deeply and at a human, like animal level. So anyway, Finola Omaraku gives €5, just says Ireland with a shamrock. Thank you very much. Long Live Era gives €2.49, says long live Era, stay strong and people united. And I'm gonna have to lean into my laptop here to see it. An Irish flag, and I believe it's a Russian flag. Oh my god, controlled by Russians. I think it could be a different flag. I don't know. I can't really. It's small. Thank you though. Teacher Connor gives €10 and says 100 or so nationalist candidates for 900 plus seats. The votes are there if we can only make the public realise there is an alternative. I need to help Dundrum Conor Rafferty on X or sorry, I need help in Dundrum, Conor Rafferty on X or irishpeople.org. Cool. Yeah, yeah, I'm going to make a video. That's all I can do really, is little videos and stuff, but I'm going to make promos trying to get people to register, because I believe that the difference, if anyone is to be elected at all, maybe loads will, maybe no one will, but I think one of the big differences is the disillusioned, kind of like Trump in 16 or whatever, this kind of a disillusioned person who's never really registered, or they're registered and they haven't voted in a long time. That's the difference, is that the likes of these scumbag, like forever politicians, the idea that the average like dopey person who goes out and votes for them because they saw a poster or whatever, the idea that because conditions are so bad and because the society is so funky at the moment, that even they would be kind of like, I couldn't be bothered going out and voting for him. I would vote for that Gombeen guy again because I'm dumb, but I'm demoralized. So it's not that I don't like the guy anymore. I just don't want to bother going out. Basically a suppressed morale or whatever, apathy. And then for the likes of, just to take someone like Derek Bly, for example, that the person who was previously apathetic now has become unapathetic. So basically a switcheroo. The regime politicians, voters have become apathetic and won't bother going out. There's no passion about that. And the people who would have been apathetic, the type of person who might vote for the likes of Derek Bly, who was apathetic and previously wouldn't have voted, that they do. And that's an asymmetry that perhaps could be created, I don't know, in the face of basically a reverse asymmetry, given all the power that they have. It's like a cheat card in a sense, a legitimate cheat card. So thank you. Armchair Limerick Nationalist, €2. Thank you very much. Sound for the ramble. Always happy to do it. And literally Kittler gives €6, no comment. Thanks very much. Okay, so thank you for all those, and thanks for joining me tonight. Big numbers. I appreciate it. It's like a privilege doing it. I love doing this. I'll be back tomorrow night. I have another half of stories and all this kind of stuff I was going to do. I will do it barring something strange happening in my personal life or scheduling or whatever. I'll try to be back tomorrow night and do them. So as always, thanks for watching. Take care, and ihawa. See you.